Today on Seventh Circle Gaming, we're going to be talking about the game Wartales. And we'll start off with the disclosures as we always do. Pause the video if you want to take a look at this more closely. We are going to move right ahead to a couple of screen captures and show you some of the world and some of the upgrade paths that you're going to see in the game. This first one is just the basic world and the user interface, followed by the tactical interface that uh, that any player would see at the start of a combat situation. And so then let's move on to the immersion for the game. War Tales is presented, as you can see, as an isometric perspective. It's a realistic, low fantasy noir inspiration art style. There's the strategic and tactical level of gameplay that you've already seen, and there's a fair amount of player agency that you haven't necessarily seen. A lot about the characters can be customized, and choices seem to have something of an impact on how the game progresses. The game is also very open-ended. We'll come back to that a bit later, but some players who are familiar with this sort of game will already have an idea of what this is going toward. And overall, the game has earned for its immersion a 5 out of 15. So then, let's move on to difficulty. Difficulty, the game has earned a 7.5 out of 15. It's very average here. The options are very basic. Where it does help itself is that clicking on those question mark icons will provide a pretty good explanation of what that difficulty option, what changing that does for the gameplay. So, worth noting that. On the other hand, the user interface doesn't necessarily affect gameplay too much. There have been in our playthroughs some difficulties with understanding what abilities can be used at what point, but that's been the biggest issue with the user interface that we've come across, and that's more of a lack of a tutorial or an insufficient attention paid to the tutorial than it is the user interfaces. So let's move right along to Lasting Appeal. Lasting Appeal is one of the low points of this of War Tales. The world is it's a living world. There are lots of trade caravans and bounty hunters and sheriff's potties, for want of a better phrase, to interact with. It's a low fantasy world. There's no magic or elves or dwarves here. And there's no downloadable content at present. There's no mods apparently available for the game either. And it is a large world to explore. However, we'll get into why that is a little bit later with the final analysis. And overall, the game score is 4.8 out of 15, which is rather low if we're honest. And we'll begin here with a little subjective statement. And the game very much seems like Dungeons and Dragons, or D&D for short, without all of the fantasy elements. So it can appeal to some players in that respect. The game is stepping back into our objectivity shoes. The game is still in development, so a lot is subject to change. Item pickups, on the other hand, can be particularly finicky. We've had some difficulty with that in all of our playthroughs, especially if the item is on a slightly different elevation from where the player characters are, or if the I could pick up is too necessarily near another object like a rock or a tree or something like that. The gameplay, on the the gameplay is open-ended, so it's a go anywhere, do anything pretty much game, and that's a positive for it. On the other hand, what we've noticed in all of our playthroughs is playthroughs of the game is that we've really needed to immerse ourselves into the game to want to go forward and continue playing it. It didn't really have a hook to pull me into the game and make me want to continue playing through it. However, for some players that can be something of an advantage because it does offer very little direction. It doesn't hold hands. A lot of it is just discover for the players free to discover for themselves. And that does lend itself to a very much fail upward mentality, which works with some games, but in this one where the player really has to want to continue playing it, it does fall a little bit short. So with some, well, we'll not get into that, but that's where the game stands at present. Again, we will caveat that with this is subject to change. So then let's move on, and we'll just, if you made it all the way to the end, fantastic. Thank you very much. We do appreciate that. Leave a comment, leave a suggestion for a game that you'd like to see an analysis of, and do the other YouTube things, and that's all I've got to say about this game.